So last session of the day, we're going to try to keep everybody engaged and thinking. I think this is probably the best, but I'm biased, session of the day. It's a deep dive into experiential learning. And for those of you who may know some of the history of the Global Forum, maybe a couple of years ago, we had a forum workshop on community engagement within health professions education. And maybe a year ago, we had a study on social determinants of health. So I see this session as bringing together those two pieces. Community-engaged health professions education that's really thinking about the social determinants of mental health. And when we talked about community-engaged health professional education, we talked about training in and with the community. And so that's what we're going to be talking about today. Just for a show of hands, how many in the room would consider themselves representatives from the community? Okay, nice. Thank you for being here. Which community? Well, you know, we could have all put our hands up because we're all part of some community, actually. And so you could wear that hat and we all could be a part of that community. How many would consider themselves learners? And now with that with that setup, and how many would consider yourselves as educators, wearing the educator hat? Okay, so great, that's fantastic. In this session, we're going to let you wear each of those different hats as you walk through experiential education. So think for a moment about experiential education. I think in the session before, it's actually a nice segue. We've been talking a bit about different educational activities where we can emphasize interprofessional, where we can emphasize the social determinants of mental health. But now we're thinking specifically about experiential education. So really thinking about the hands-on element. And I think the learning piece of it requires us to be intentional and reflective. And so when we really think about experiential learning as being intentional, reflective in and with the community, I think we're going to hear from the session. I want you to walk away from this session having some examples of experiential learning that touch upon social determinants of mental health. And think of yourselves as educators, learners, and communities, and what does it take to really make it happen? So we've done a lot of framing in the morning. We've done a lot of reflecting. Now, if you want to be actionable when you leave here, we want you to leave here with examples and some of that reflection. So that's our hope for the session that we're going to listen to. We have three parts. The first part, we're going to listen to representatives from the community sharing back with us some suggestions for health professions educators. We're going to then hear from students who are going to tell us about powerful and influential experiences they've had as learners. And then we're going to think and reflect from the faculty perspective. And as we've gone through the course of the day, we've talked a lot about the system and about getting students into the right environment, getting the environment and the practice environment set up for this. That piece about faculty development and what does it take to make sure that faculty have the right capacity to provide this experiential learning environment. So that's the three-phase approach we're going to have for this session. All right, so I'm going to do the first introduction is for Sandra Lane. So Sandra Lane is a professor of public health and anthropology at Syracuse University and a research professor in the Department of Obstetrics and Gynecology at Upstate Medical University. Her research focuses on the impact of racial, ethnic, and gender disadvantage on maternal, child, and family health in urban areas of the United States. So Sandy's has two guests. She's going to introduce her guests, and she's going to facilitate the 20 minutes with her team. And then we'll have two other sessions that follow with the students and then with the faculty, and then we'll have a panel group at the end.
Thank you very much, and thank you to the Global Forum for inviting us. So on my right is Love Mouity, who works for Catholic Charities of Onondaga County as a coordinator for refugee outreach. Love has also taught, we're in our fourth semester, teaching a refugee health course to interprofessional students, linking each two students with their own refugee family, and the refugee families sign their informed consent and get a stipend to participate. And so I'm delighted to introduce Love, but let me introduce Noble also, and then we'll have 10 minutes from Love, 10 minutes from Noble. Noble, whose real name is Timothy Jennnings-Bey, is the CEO of the Street Addiction Institute Incorporated. Oh, I didn't tell you about their education. Love has a bachelor's degree from Syracuse University in International Affairs. International Relations or affairs? Yeah, sorry, I always get that wrong. And Noble has a bachelor's degree in criminal justice. So Noble is the CEO of Street Addiction Institute Incorporated, which is a community-based agency, 501c3, that was established in 2015 to focus on community violence and trauma. So we're going to start with Love, and we're timing ourselves, and I'm doing the PowerPoint. Take it away.
Hello, everyone. I would like to thank the community for giving us the honor of being here, and also thank you, the audience, for coming. My name is Love Mouity. I do have a strong accent. I'm a native French speaker, so I speak multiple languages. I will try my best. If you don't understand, please ask and stop me. I'm a refugee from Congo, Brazzaville, because there are two Congos. Okay. There are two Congos. There is one Belgium one, commonly called in the past Belgium, and I'm from the French one, Congo Brazzaville. But those countries are just divided by the Congo River. And I came here in 2007. I'm blessed to have the parent that my dad was somebody really important in my country, and he has a degree in military science from USSR. He speaks fluently Russian, and we grew up in a house that where all of us, we speak multiple language. And my mom was an English teacher, so we were part of a ruling class. But in some part in the world, when you belong to a certain class, you fear and revered, and that sometimes can get to your mind, and people have tendency to abuse the other that doesn't belong to. But my parents taught us to open our heart, our doors to everyone, and this is what have saved us, because when war happened in my country, and the main target were the ruling class, and the people that help us escape were the people that we help, were the people that we open our doors. We consider without any preconceived idea. And so far, that's what I can say. Coming here, it was for me a second chance to start a new life. And I know why my goals coming here. And we work in factories, my brother and I, because nobody here. You are somebody over there, not here. And we've been through a lot. Like, I will pass that, the story about being in jungle, running for your life, and going from a certain prestigious life to nothing. It's really hard. And this is where if you're not strong enough, and it's a trauma. But we survive, we try to go forward, and that's what we did so far. And if I'm working with this agency, it's just to be a role model for my peers that are coming. It sounds cliche to say, if I did it, you can do it, but that's how I see it. And this is, for me, an opportunity to share my story and give the world. I'm not the only one in this situation. There is a lot of stories similar to mine, but as you can see on the picture, so this is what we do every day, and we deal with clients. We have multiple issues, going from mental health to like having trouble to adjust in this new life. It's not that easy. The shock culture and the values, it's really hard, but we are there to help them, to guide, and to have them become self-efficient in the future. This is our goal, to transform and restore hope. On the picture, as you can notice, there is Dr. Lane, Dr. Shaw, myself, and Mrs. Tina, and also Lydia. This is our student. We taught them to go when they go to, like we do visit, to have this mentality of table rase in French, like tabula rasa. Like,
Open mind?
yes. Even though you know, but go like you're going to learn, observe, listen, and being patient. Also compassionate. Because these are, even though you understand or identify the issue, you cannot solve it overnight. It takes time. And you have to gain those client trust, because it's not that easy to open about what did happen in the past, especially when it was horrific. Do I see out time?
Honesty.
Yeah. And also, I mentioned, we always discussed about honesty, mutual honesty, because I can come to you and listen to you, but once I leave, once I turn my back, usually, okay, forget about it, until the next time. But when you put yourself in somebody else's shoes, you take time to understand. You take time to be honest. You take time to follow up. That's we have a tendency to always. That's just me. Don't quote me on that. I might be wrong, but we always walk the walk, but we don't talk. Walk the walk.
We talk the talk, but don't walk the walk.
Yeah.
Right?
We talk the talk, we don't walk the walk. And when we do, we help, but it's not enough. It's just like superficial. And what next? Did we make sure that these people someday, from our help, from what we have taught them, can taught the other that are coming? And I learned from Nelson Mandela. It's an African philosophy we call Ubuntu. I am because we all depend on each other. What impact me, impact you. Doesn't matter wherever you might be or how wealthy you might be or poor. It's all about human rights. And this is what guides us. This is our mantra. Dr. Lane knows it, and this is what we taught to our students, because someday, if they're willing to stay, or wherever they might go, they will deal with somebody who has been a refugee, just to be aware, to prepare them for any eventuality they might face over there. And if you do have questions, I'm all open.
We can move on to Noble and then have questions.
Yeah.
So, the next person to speak is Timothy Jennnings-Bey, or Noble. And take it away, Noble.
Good afternoon. A lot of you guys received the orange thumb drive. On that thumb drive are 10 academic articles that were produced by my team. So when you read the articles, enjoy. As it was said by Dr. Lane, my name is Timothy Jennnings-Bey, also known as Noble. Currently, I'm the director for the trauma response team in the city of Syracuse, where we respond to shootings and homicides on a 24-hour basis. You have to know, this is not a job for me. It's a ministry. I don't know if any of you have been upstate New York and Syracuse, but trust me, you can't pay me enough to leave my house January, February, March, in the middle of the night responding to shootings and homicides. Also, I'm the creator of the theory called street addiction, which highlights the fact that the streets have an addictive nature, just like cocaine, alcohol, or gambling. Individuals reared in that process are in need of respite and rehabilitation before we can, quote unquote, mainstream them back into any educational process or career path. I just wanted to talk about the bridge that should be built from the world of academia back into the community. The only way that that bridge can be built and be successful if it's done through the lens of empathy, right? To empathize with individuals who are rare in that process. Me, myself, personally come from one of the worst zip codes in the city of Syracuse, and being around Dr. Lane for a long period of time, from her world of academia and my world of growing up in the community are two different parallel universes. As I sit here, I'm very thankful to be here because I'm a voice of my peers, a lot of them which have been murdered in the prison system. They will never have the opportunity to come in spaces like this and be able to articulate the pain for the people that, we leave behind as we aspire to do greater things in life. So with that being said, I always tell this story. Me and Dr. Lane, we were sitting in her office one day at Syracuse University, nice spring day, and, just out of the blue, she said, Noble, I'm pretty successful. I'm a older white lady. Women don't tell their age. But she said, I don't know anybody in my life who's been murdered. So I thought to myself, like, what the hell is wrong with Sandy? Like, you don't know anybody? She said, no, I don't know anybody. So with that being said, me being here, I shouldn't know over 150 people who've been murdered, right? The only way me and Sandy were able to connect was in that space of empathy, right? Because you have to understand, when somebody coming from the community and we blend with the world of academia, that is a healing space for both sides of the aisle, right? So out of that healing space, me and Sandy were able to develop a relationship that goes beyond the classroom, that goes beyond the community. The relationship is intentional, right? Outside, if the relationship is not intentional, it's going to be transferred from relationship to relationship. Excuse me. That's what it would turn into. So has to be intentional. Like Sandy mentioned, educating over 1,000 students. When I come into those spaces, just to try to get students to understand what it's like growing up in these traumatized zip codes. And a lot of people always talk about cultural competence, right? They use that term like it's a one-way street. Cultural competence is a sharing process, right? It has to flow both ways. And that's how you enhance the relationship and move the process forward. Our goal and my goal was always to be a different sentence in the narrative of the trauma, right? To be a different sentence in the narrative of the trauma. So in doing that, being able, the university afforded me space, afforded me the opportunity to produce academic journals. For where I stand, that never was done before. So it gave me the opportunity and young people behind me to say, you don't have to aspire to be a star athlete. You don't have to aspire to be on MTV or BET, right? You could take this approach and be a scholar, where you could articulate the pain of the people and from which you came, so you can help generations that come behind us. So the relationship piece from the world of academia and the community is extremely important because we've created a resonant tone. The theory of street addiction doesn't exist anywhere else on the planet, right? And I don't take that lightly. I feel extremely blessed to have that opportunity by God and my ancestors, that I was the person that had the heart to be able to hold that seed and participate in its flowering. Because everybody in here developed and got here through stages. Nobody just fell out of the sky, right? We all have stories to tell, whether they're rooted in trauma. Some trauma is, it varies in degrees. They say everybody is traumatized on the scale from 0 to 100, right? But what we try to get people to understand as students, in which Sandy played a big role, trauma is an invisible demon. And if you don't give it the attention it needs, it will suffocate you. Traumatized people look for their voice in the midst of panic. So one thing about being empathetic, one thing Sandy, Dr. Lane never did, because traumatized people lose their ability to say ouch, right? I only know you're a human or you're participating in the human element when you have the ability to say ouch. Outside of that, the trauma may have numbed you. So Sandy will go out of her way to make sure she's not offensive, because coming from these communities, you don't know. You may think you're educating somebody along the way, but you can be very offensive at times. So you have to be mindful to operate from that space of empathy and compassion, because it's a healing process, like I mentioned, and it flows both ways. Trust me that the relationship has to be healthy, because as we sit here now, if I was back home and my cell phone buzzed and it was from the 911 center and there was a homicide, I have to switch hats very quickly. So I would go from here to a crime scene to a hospital. A lot of people in this life look for miracles, but I deal with those miracles every day, because every day I'm surrounded by women in the community who lose their children. This is not normal, right? In case men don't know, and I'll be glad to talk with you or debate with you after this about this next statement, but women run the world, right? If you don't believe me, everybody just feel your belly button. You all came from a woman. So it's not normal for a woman to carry a child for 9 months and then somebody else decides to take the life of that child, right? So those miracles are before my face every day, because I deal with mothers who come to the same hospital, the same emergency room, the same rooms they identified their dead children, to reach back and help other mothers in the community and families who are going through the same thing. Right? So that is powerful, needless to say. So the education process at the School of Falk, Syracuse University, this is what the students are exposed to. It was mentioned about the bus tours earlier. We also do that. The way we took the shortcut, I just lead the bus tour, right? You get some people from the community, because initially when it was brought, I said, well, people said, well, wait a minute, a bus tour is like, you can't set the bus tour up like you're riding through a zoo, right? So people would take offense to that, and I have to go back into the community. I will be the one that have to bear that, like, look, you rolled through here on the bus, like, what's going on? So to cut away at that, I would lead the bus tour, Dr. Lane on the bus, and other community members to point out things in the community, to come up with some viable solutions or the history of the community. Because when you're traumatized, you don't have time for history. I think Dr., what was her name? Dr. Bigfoot?
Bigfoot, yes.
When she talked about the relationship generationally, when she could reach back and touch history. But when you're dealing with traumatized populations, if I come from a community that's rooted in poverty and under the canopy of trauma, and I'm sitting here telling you I know over 150 people that's been murdered, that's how our relationships are forged, right, in that process. So we hold hands with that process. So those relationships, until you come to the realization to, it was said from this side of the room about that grit, that ability to dig down. In essence, we're being held together by spaghetti noodles. That's what trauma is, right? And in this relationship and with the students and the professors, the world of academia, those spaghetti noodles are broken through a healing process, because we all need each other to heal. And healing stands for helping everyone achieve love. Thank you.
So I think we have time for some questions. Go ahead.
Can you talk a little bit, maybe both of you, about how students react to these experiences? So if they are coming from a completely different life experience, what do you do? I imagine there's a degree to which it can be overwhelming. Can you reflect a little bit on how they respond to these experiences?
Yes. some stand the disruption because they are shocked to see the reality. They leave their comfort zone. And they have been, during our home visits, sometimes our clients live in low-income housing, so you have all type of issue. They just heard, they just read, but now they're seeing it from their own naked eyes, and usually some stand, some just the next semester, I'm not coming back. Some try to help and stand the process, try to understand and make sure that, this is not right, and give some help. They stay and help us to help the people that we work with.
One of the things I do immediately when I'm talking to students is humanize the space, meaning that, unfortunately we, systems historically or presently have been put in place to, with this theory of racism. So because you from a different culture or community, there's no way you could understand what I'm going through, vice versa. So what I tell the students and the faculty is I don't necessarily believe in racism because it's a theory. So theories, they could flip, flop, and jump. There's two things happening and nothing in between. Either we're humanizing each other's experience or we're dehumanizing the experience. So you could come into a room such as this in the morning time, just come take your seat. You don't acknowledge anyone's presence because you don't say good morning. You don't know what people have been through to get here in this time and in this space. So a simple gesture of good morning, I just humanized this entire space, right, and gave credence to my existence. So that's one of the ways and one of the strategies that I use to take some of the burden off of the young people, because what happens a lot, some people might take on a guilt trip to say, I didn't know that this existed, right? So to cut away from that, we're all just sharing in the human experience. Everybody has their own experiences. This is just mine, and I would love to hear yours at some point.
If I may chime in, the great thing is they go with something. They have learned something. Stay or living, at least they have learned something about the reality of some population.
More questions?
Thank you very much. I think your teaching is incredibly humanizing, but also very, very powerful for the students. And so what you've provided is examples of probably the ultimate learning experience. I have one question, and that is, when you are faced with the students in those circumstances, some of them may not be comfortable, some of them are obviously never really worked with the emotions at that point. How do you manage when it may interfere with your work and how you're working with the people in your community when you've got somebody else that you're having to take care of from the student side? So does it ever interfere with what you're doing as part of your basic jobs?
No, not at all.
Okay.
But I think we use this term community loosely, right? Because, the term community is a common unity, which would denote a synthesized consciousness, which gives off a certain tone, right, to the social climate. So to make students feel like they're part of that process, it's not my community and your community, right? We're trying to move humanity to a space of a world community. So to keep those lines, and so we don't separate the realities, we try to blend those together. Because if I come from a place of dysfunction, right? I remember one time I had to go to one of my professors offered counseling during her lunch break. Right? I took advantage of that because I wanted to hear from somebody outside of the boiling pot. Right? I needed another perspective to where I was headed. So even that is an educational process. So to get the students to understand that we're all part of this world community, because I don't know where I may run into you later on in life. You don't know where you may run into me or somebody that we're connected to, just as Dr. Bigfoot had during her presentation. So you just never know. So to make those students feel, inclusive and part of the process. And it's never a burden. It's just another episode in the work.
Yes.
This is amazing. This is powerful, and this is real. And it's so much more rich than the artificial things we come up with in the educational space. So if we want to emulate this, if we want to use this approach, how do you start? How do you find those relationships and build them to the point where you can make this into an educational space?
You could or I could. Go ahead. Yeah, you go ahead. The start is, like I mentioned, is being intentional from the standpoint of empathy. I always reference back to Dr. Lane. It wasn't a situation where she felt sorry, right, for me. I think in her expertise and just how she's wired, it was more of a challenging of the narrative, right? You have a grand opportunity to help people, help young people, help the community and the families move forward. And I always go back to being intentional, because one thing about traumatized populations, when you talk about coming into the community, people know when you're playing games, right? Because my playing games is based on survival mode. Where we come from, if I play games, I might get my head blown off, right? And that has happened. So to come into educational spaces when people aren't intentional and they're just there trying to meet a quota, people feel that, right? They may not have the language to articulate how they feel, but they read it on you, right? Body language, you can't hide that, right? I think God was intentional doing that, making human beings, we're the only creatures that blush. So to show the shame on your face if, you're getting outside of yourself. So just being intentional and being sincere. And Sandy, which was kind of odd for her colleagues, because Sandy would say, well, Noble's the expert, right? And then people would be like, well, what do you mean he's the expert? Like, some people can't even process that, because people love making boxes and they can't wait to fill them, right? I don't fit those boxes, right? So just being intentional when you're going forth into the community, and give community members the ability to articulate the experience. And then it's a shared process. Because for me, like, you move away from the corner when you graduate high school. Then you get a college degree, you're that much further away from the corner. Then you come in spaces like this, you're that much further away from the corner. They still live at ground zero. They have the solutions, right? So to create that open dialogue and lines of communication, they have the solution. They know what's best for them, and people know what's ailing them and the solution to it. We just don't give them the spaces and the opportunity to articulate that.
Yes, as he said, being sincere and honest. Also, make sure that you, beside acting, you have the resources. We have to have the resources. Like, I'm not trying to say clean, but usually they say those places, men's, esprit sain dans un corps sain. It means healthy mind in a body mind, in a healthy body. If you don't start by taking care of those places, really taking care of those places, making sure they have everything. And on our side, when, for example, we upset about something, we don't have to destroy what we already build. And first, starting by identifying the issue and making sure, I'm sorry to go all over the places, but I'm trying, if I'm still, English is not my language, I'm sorry. But yeah, making sure that you are there, you're putting your money where your mouth is. Not pretending, because most of us, as you say, the intention has to be real, not just superficial. Because the tendency, we always talk the same story, the same fact remain the same. And there is no real willingness. I might be wrong, but there is no willingness to heal, to find solution. We find a solution that not permanent. They just temporary solution. And we perpetuate the same problem. That's all I can say.
Can I also respond to that from an educator's point of view? I believe you have to put the time in. A lot of people who've heard about our projects would like to maybe replicate them, and then when they realize they have to leave the ivory tower and find parking someplace where there's no parking, and if you also wait just until you need community members, then it's going to feel to them that it's very instrumental on your part, that you're just going manipulatively. And some of my colleagues thought that you could just drop people down at Catholic Charities or Street Addiction. Just drop the students down, maybe even just send them on a bus. And the community and the faculty member thought they didn't have to go. Well, my husband and I intentionally, we're anthropologists with public health training, we intentionally tried to get to know people. And that means going to their children's First Holy Communions, or I was the labor coach for a student whose baby's father was deported right before the birth. Anyway, that's another story. But we go and we share food. We invite people to our homes. So the extent to which you can do that, and then you're chatting together and you say, oh, gee, we could do that. You want to? Or, gee, do you have time? Would you come into my class? And then the other thing is our university doesn't have enough money to pay guest speakers. And especially, I have to say, they don't like to pay community members. They don't mind paying people with fancy titles. So I just pay them from my salary what I would be paid if it were me being the guest speaker. That includes, everything we do. So I'm not saying you have to do that, but it does work better.
So, Love and Noble, let me just say we're very grateful for you to be present with us today and to share your stories with us. I think you've created for us an experiential learning moment. So let's all thank Love and Noble.
Thank you.
Thank you. We're going to invite the second panel up. I think that was very powerful, I think, for all of us, having come out of a session earlier where we were trying to design very deliberately educational activities, and here we just landed ourselves in a very powerful moment. And it didn't take much more than an authentic story and an audience that's present and listening. And therein lies the learning. So we are going to now take a different lens, and we are going to listen to the learners and students who've had experiential learning moments. And our facilitator for this session is Dr. Matthew Shank, who is the president of the Virginia Foundation of Independent Colleges.